Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce and Chilliwack Downtown Business Improvement Association's debate event, Chilliwack Votes 2021. The Chamber would first like to acknowledge that tonight's debate is being held on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stalo people. I'd like to thank the candidates for agreeing to be a part of this important debate. While the two sponsoring groups are hoping to keep the evening focused on those issues of interest to the business community, we encourage the whole community to watch and are confident that the topics and answers will resonate. I'm your host and moderator for the evening, Clint Hames, and I'm here to tell you the debate will be divided into 4 sections. The first section, candidates are going to be given 3 minutes to make an opening comment, an introduction if you will. The second section, each candidate will be asked to provide a 2-minute answer to a pre-selected question developed by the committee working on this debate. Following each candidate answer, the other candidates will have an opportunity for 1.5 minutes to respond or rebut the answer. Following this, the original candidate will have 1 minute to summarize or rebut the comments from the other candidate, and we'll work our way through all of the candidates. The third section, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask one question of any other candidate. The Chamber and BIA, of course, would prefer these questions were relevant to the Chamber and BIA members. However, the selected candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer the question, followed by each candidate's answer to the main question. The other 3 candidates are going to have the opportunity for a 1-minute response. And following that, the original questioner will have another minute to rebut or critique the response. And don't worry, I'll be here to help guide us through that rather complicated section. The fourth section, the candidates will be asked general questions from people watching the debate. Using the online platform Slido or sli.do, you can ask questions or like an existing question. Check on the screen for the website address or type sil.do in your browser and enter the hashtag #DebateChilliwack and follow the instructions on the site. On the top of your screen, you can toggle between candidates to ask a specific question to a specific candidate, or you can simply like an existing question, which then moves that question up in the ranking, and it means it'll most likely move to the top of the list. We hope that questions will be relevant to the issues, as I said, facing the Chamber and the BIA. However, they will be asked in the order that they are ranked by the platform. To allow as many questions as possible, each candidate will only have the opportunity to rebut 2 candidate answers, and answers will be moderated to 2 minutes with rebuttals down to 1 minute. I'll be going through that again. I know it's complicated for everybody, but as we get to each section, I will go through that again. At the very end, we'll give candidates 2 minutes each to wrap up, and then we'll be done for the evening. We hope that this combines questions that the Chamber is interested in, combines questions that you as candidates might like an answer to, and will give the community a chance to ask questions as well. And as I see already on Slido, there are a significant number of questions coming in. So have a look at that and see what questions are there. Let's introduce the candidates for this evening. The candidates tonight are incumbent Conservative Mark Strahl, Green Party candidate Art Green. We have Liberal Party of Canada candidate Kelly Velonis, New Democratic Party candidate DJ Pohl, and People's Party of Canada candidate Rob Bogunovic. Very nice to have you all with us this evening. This is great. So, first of all, I'm going to open things up, and the order that these things happen in has been sort of randomly selected, and I hope you've all had a chance to look at this, and I hope you think it's as fair as I found it, struggling to make sure that everybody got a different order each time. So we're going to start with opening remarks, 3 minutes for Mark Strahl. Mark, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Strahl, your Conservative candidate. I was born and raised right here in Chilliwack, and I've been married to my wife, Lisa, for 22 years, and our son turns 17 next month. We love this remarkable community. It's been an honor to serve the people of Chilliwack-Hope for the last 10 years as your Member of Parliament. As a member of the official opposition Conservatives, I've helped to hold Justin Trudeau to account. Now Canadians can hold him accountable as well. People are asking why we're having an election at all. Justin Trudeau promised he wouldn't call an election during the pandemic, but he did anyway, in the middle of the 4th wave. Thousands of our fellow British Columbians remain on evacuation alert because of the wildfire emergency. The situation in Afghanistan has turned into an absolute catastrophe, with Canadian allies who'd been promised help being abandoned by our government to face retribution from the Taliban. Instead of focusing on these crises, Justin Trudeau was focused on himself because he was tired of being held accountable in Ottawa, and he wants a majority government so that he can once again run roughshod over the House of Commons. After nearly 6 years, Justin Trudeau's shown that he cannot be trusted. He's broken his promises on fiscal responsibility, electoral reform, and on running an ethical and transparent government, to name just a few. Just this week, we've read more damning evidence from Jody Wilson-Raybould about Justin Trudeau's shameful conduct in the SNC-Lavalin affair. And even now, during a global pandemic, the Trudeau government has continued to abuse the public trust, shutting down Parliament, giving multi-million-dollar deals to Liberal insiders, and presiding over the We Charity scandal, which forced the resignation of the finance minister. Instead of rewarding this continued corruption, Canadians can choose the Conservative plan to secure the future for all Canadians. Our plan will make life more affordable by leaving more money in your pocket, bringing government spending under control, and growing the economy. We will restore ethics and accountability in Ottawa with tougher laws and stiffer penalties, because it's time to put an end to Liberal corruption. We will stand up for your fundamental rights and freedoms and reject Justin Trudeau's politics of discrimination and division. We'll invest $60 billion more into our universal healthcare system so that it's always there when you and your family need it. And we'll take immediate action on Indigenous reconciliation and environmental protection, because the time for broken Liberal promises is over. I've been a strong voice for Chilliwack-Hope in Ottawa, never forgetting where I come from and who I work for. I've always tried to take the common sense of the common people to the House of Commons. And if you give me the honor of being re-elected, I'll continue to fight for this community and the hardworking, honorable people who've chosen to make it their home. On September 20th, I'm asking you to vote to secure the future and vote Conservative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next candidate will be Kelly Velonis. You have 3 minutes, Kelly.
Can you hear me?
Certainly can.
Great. Thank you so much, Clint. And I just want to thank the Chamber and the BIA for giving us this opportunity, and my fellow candidates as well for being here tonight. My name is Kelly Velonis, and I am your Liberal candidate for Chilliwack and Hope. I'm very excited to be here tonight. I'm very excited to represent you, if you will have me, in Ottawa. I believe it's time for Chilliwack and Hope to have a voice in Ottawa that represents the diverse and inclusive community that we've become. And I will be your voice to Ottawa, not Ottawa's voice to us. I'm committed to building workable solutions that will solve the most pressing issues for Chilliwack and Hope, including becoming a model for a greener community in Canada, protecting this beautiful surroundings for future generations. We need to continue the journey of reconciliation for Indigenous people, bringing hope and optimism for our future. We need to address local infrastructure issues, such as transportation, that take away from spending hours at home with our families instead of on our highways. We have a commitment and comprehensive plan to address affordable housing and homelessness. We will provide evidence-based solutions to better manage the mental health crisis that desperately needs our attention, lifting the most vulnerable out of poverty. Not everyone has a family support system, yet everyone deserves a fighting chance. And we will ensure our communities are safe, welcoming, and inclusive for all that choose to make Chilliwack and Hope their home. We will address the addiction and substance abuse challenges that are making our communities vulnerable and unsafe, and enhance the lives of seniors who so desperately need our attention for having built our great community through hard work and determination. And we will continue to honor and protect veterans as they have honored and protected us through their service. We must stay the course and not take risky gambles. A Conservative government will undo all the progress that we've made. A Conservative government won't even stand up for vaccines, yet they want to put money into testing instead. They don't even address climate change as an issue, yet I hear my fellow candidate here talking about forest fires, which is a crisis from the climate. An NDP government would put our country at risk because they lack the experience in governing at a national level. BC is stronger with a more unified Liberal voice in Ottawa. The needs of British Columbians will be better served by sending a cohesive coalition of MPs not a fractured mix of different parties. Thank you.
Just looking for a high sign from everybody here in the studio saying everything is great. So sorry to do this to you, Rob. Nothing like giving a speech a second time. You can cover up all the mistakes you thought you might have made in the first one. So over to you, Rob Bogunovic, People's Party of Canada. Thanks.
Thank you. I am Rob Bogunovic, and I am unvaccinated. For some reason, the Liberals and the NDP seem to think that this should define me as a person, and that expecting fair and equal treatment is, to quote Kelly Velonis, a request for special privileges and exceptions that are outrageous. I was born into a heritage of freedom. A decade before I was born, John Diefenbaker declared, "I am a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, or free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind." I was born to a free nation, but I was also born to a nation that has become increasingly complacent in the defense of our freedoms, a nation that took its freedom for granted. We can't be complacent anymore. We have to push back against the unjust laws that are stripping people of their rights and their dignities. I have often said that governments suck at everything, and we should have no more of it than we can afford. We have seen the government making huge mistakes over the last 18 months as they've handled this pandemic, and those mistakes have cost this country huge. And now, to compound the error, we see that we have nurses and frontline heroes now face losing their jobs, as do countless others, simply because they choose to remain unvaxxed. We are a diverse community, and we are facing immense discrimination simply because we choose to remain unvaxxed. We were told by the Liberals that they did a great job handling this pandemic, but all through this pandemic, we have seen the Liberals making mistake after mistake. We saw that they had trouble initially buying up the vaccines. Then they were buying up the vaccines people didn't want, like AstraZeneca, and telling us it didn't matter which vaccine you got. They told people that they could have 4 months between the first vax and the second vax, even though Pfizer wasn't saying anything of the sort. Then they told us we could mix and match vaccines. And all along, they just keep changing their story and pretending they're doing a good job. I'm not convinced. I think we need better from this country. I think we need better for this country. And I think that the People's Party can deliver better for this country. I'm Rob Bogunovic. I'm with the People's Party. I'm for a Canada strong and free. I am for the people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rob, and sorry to make you do that all again. Our next candidate is Art Green, representing the Green Party of Canada. Art, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to mention that I'm speaking from the banks of the second largest salmon spawning river in the world, on the unceded territory of the Great Stolo Nation. My name is Arthur Green, and I have been your federal Green Party of Canada representative in the Eastern Fraser Valley for the last number of years. I was born here, and I have resided here for the last 66 years. It's becoming more and more obvious by the day that the old Canada that we once all revered is slowly falling by the wayside into what we might have considered unacceptable only a few decades earlier. Expanding pandemics combined with a loss of trust and appreciation for its healthcare and medical system has left a great number of Canadians skeptical as to where their government is leading them. From back in the day when we religiously trusted our doctors and nurses, as compared to today, where a certain fraction of the population whose anti-vaccination stance is considerable enough to create a bump in election polling for its likewise political candidates. These bipolar opinions have been created through an example by our very own bipartisan political system. These juvenile partisanships may very well be a signal of civility being challenged in Canada in a way that's never been seen in this part of the world before. Because of these partisanship rivalries, our governments are no longer in control. It's now become almost impossible to create any type of consensus. It doesn't matter what the issue is, even a common value one. They just can't muster a common proposal without putting the governing parties stamp of approval upon it. Unless these juvenile behavior ceases immediately, our chances of surviving some of these impending apocalyptic events, including all aspects of climate change and global warming, is minimal, but more than likely impossible. As a longtime climate activist, the political arena is an opportunity to be heard, so I chose it. I would beg of the other parties to accept my challenge to keep the debate of the impending climate crisis at the top of the electoral agenda. I believe not only is this a way of preserving our civilization, but also I feel there's a hidden value in doing the right thing. I believe also in doing the right thing, which would have to create a mass mobilization only comparable to that of the Second World War. In fact, the transition and mobilization to cleaner and renewable energy systems could very well create the greatest economic catalyst that the world will ever see. We may very well clean the earth and prep for future generations while padding our pensions. But most importantly, creating a livable and sustainable planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Art. Our next candidate will be DJ Pohl, representing the New Democratic Party of Canada. DJ?
Hi, friends. My name is DJ Pohl, and I'm the NDP candidate for Chilliwack-Hope. Zooming to you on the Stolo unceded traditional territory of the Pohl and Chilliwack tribes. Chilliwack is my home. It's where I've lived for the past 32 of my 35 years of life. I work here for the BC Prosecution Service, where I've been for 14 years after graduating from the University of the Fraser Valley in 2009 with a degree in criminal justice. Shortly after that, I started volunteering with restorative justice, and I learned how to address the underlying reasons that crime is happening and those issues in harm and conflict that exist in our community. And there's no shortage of that right now. I got involved with the labor movement, where I hold a number of elected positions, including the president of the Fraser Valley Labor Council. And joining that together with my pursuit for justice, once there were threats to our local water sources, I got involved in environmental activism. And part of that crossover with the labor justice, ensuring that workers always have a voice at the table and things that are going to impact them. All of these things together led to a lifelong commitment to justice, fairness, and equality. The journey is important to talk about because it led me here. The communities in our riding are growing and changing quickly, and our representation must grow and change with it. The unnecessary election we find ourselves in provides an opportunity to change what our representation looks like and what we expect and deserve of that representation. The status quo is no longer working, and the pandemic has clearly highlighted this. After 18 months of COVID-19, we see how communities and people have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We see gaps in services and resources and barriers that exist to access them. Again, there's an opportunity here to address these gaps long-term, support small business, get the economy back in order without destroying the environment. And as we continue to bring to light the full truth of residential schools, the road to reconciliation will be rooted in truth, accountability, and justice. The change for this requires political will and leadership. I'm running to offer my skills in leadership, have the impact I'm hearing is needed in our community to create spaces for all voices to be heard. I want to allow for people to see themselves reflected in leadership, and I want to empower others to fight for the change needed in our communities. I commit to earning your vote, and if elected, I'll work even harder to continue to earn that trust and to honor your vote. I will fight for electoral reform to ensure all voices are heard and that no one is left behind. Looking forward to the discussion tonight and hearing the important issues that matter to you. I hope you'll consider voting DJ Pohl on September 20th. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DJ, and thanks to all the candidates. You all stayed under your time limit, which is great as we move forward here. We're now going to move into section 2, which is these are questions that were specifically prepared by members of the chamber, and they even suggested who they might like to answer these questions. So each candidate is going to have a question that was designed for them, and they will have 2 minutes to answer. Each of the other candidates will have 90 seconds or a minute and a half to rebut anything they heard in that answer, and then the original questioner will get a minute to sum up. So it will go this way. Kelly Velonis will have the first question, and then we will ask in a specific order the other candidates to please take a minute and a half to respond to that answer. So let's get right to the first question, and this is to Kelly Velonis. Employers in a number of key sectors, tourism, hospitality, large industries requiring skilled workers, small business dependent on part-time workers, they're all struggling at this time. Many blame the continuation of the government's CERB program as the problem. What's your party's plan to address this critical issue in the short and long term? Kelly?
Thank you for that question, Clint, and thank you for bringing that question up to my attention. There is so much uncertainty right now, and I see for especially small businesses why they're struggling to find employees. And a lot of that, I believe, has to do with the fact that we need to get the vaccines rolled out. People are uncertain. People are afraid to take that job in a small business where they're going to have somebody come in and argue with them about having to wear a mask, or somebody come in and argue with them about having to show their COVID vaccine. We shouldn't be putting workers in these positions. We need to have a unified front as our government to stand up for all Canadians and continue to get vaccinated so we can hit this pandemic hard and move forward for economic growth and recovery. We have been there for Canadians with our Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, our Canada Recovery Benefit, our emergency wage subsidy, our emergency rent subsidy, and lockdown support for small businesses, our commercial rent assistant. We are investing to support almost 500,000 new training and work opportunities, including youth and Indigenous programs, funding for early learning and childcare, $10 a day daycare, which is so important. It will put workers back into the workforce, making families be able to afford to go to work and afford to keep their kids in childcare and feed their families. We made sure that businesses in this riding could stay open and keep workers on the payroll with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. We will continue to fight for all Canadians and fight for all businesses.
Thank you very much. Kelly, I think your camera is turned off, and I'm wondering if that's on your end or on our end. We could hear you fine.
You can't see me?
But I could not see you. But we did get your answer, and I'm going to move on now. In terms of a rebuttal, Mark Strahl, you've got a minute and a half to respond to what you heard. Mark?
Thanks, Clint. I think when the early days of the pandemic in March of 2020, it was necessary to provide assistance to workers who were told to stay home to do their part. They were forced to stay home in many cases by government orders. So it was necessary for government to provide assistance to them during that time. And we certainly supported those efforts to get those payments to Canadians who needed it. I think now, as we are working our way out of the pandemic, we need to make sure that work is always more beneficial to someone than a government benefit. Right now, there's too many cases where it's just not worth it financially for someone to go and take a job in the service industry or go and fill a vacant job. So we need to have a plan, which we have what's called a Canada Job Search Plan to support small businesses as they hire people to come off of long-term employment. But the key here is to ensure always that that work will leave more money in a worker's pocket than not taking an available job. So that's a critical philosophical difference, I think, between Conservatives and the Liberals here. We need to wind down these programs and make sure that we're getting people back into the workforce to fill the jobs that need to be filled in our community.
Thank you, Mark. Rob Bogunovic, your response to that.
Thank you. My question is, how does the Liberals plan to deal with the fallout of their getting a bunch of employees fired quite suddenly simply because of their status being unvaccinated? We're seeing that already these businesses are struggling to find workers. They're going to have a greater struggle when they're having to deal with keeping their workers. And this is a great challenge. We have to make sure that we have a functioning employment system. And the best way to do that is to make sure that free market principles are able to prevail within that. We got a government that right now is trampling upon the rights of Canadians to work, trying to dictate who can and who cannot work in various sectors, all based on whether or not they have gotten their vaccinations. And I don't think that's a fair position for a government to take. I think that CERB has done some damage, but I think that's nothing compared to the damage that is about to be done when businesses already struggling are going to have to lay off their most competent workers in many cases. And we're going to start seeing shortages across all the sectors because what the Liberals and the NDP in this province are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Art Green, your response to that answer by Kelly.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when COVID began and the government jumped in, because they had to shut everything down, obviously they had to give people some subsistence so that they could carry on with their lives. But one thing that's always kind of puzzled me is the fact that, we've had this very successful employment insurance program, or what we used to call unemployment insurance program, for many years. And there's a maximum rate that is supposed to be livable. And, you can carry on and continue your life in a solvent fashion, financial way at a maximum benefit. But for some reason, the government decided that they were going to give everybody $2,000. I mean, even I thought, wow, $2,000. Well, maybe I should just quit my job and grab the $2,000. And, I won't have to go to work anymore. And it's a lot cheaper not having to go to work than it is to go to work. So, why didn't they just put everybody on a maximum EI claim? And then they could control, if they're working or how much money, if they made extra money in the meantime, they'd be able to regulate the subsistence. And not only that, it would save us like 20% right off the top, because I believe a maximum EI claim was about $800 or around that amount every 2 weeks. And the government is just forking out $1,000 every 2 weeks to anybody.
That's
the temptation
90
to...
seconds, Art. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm trying to be very rigid with the time here and be fair to everybody.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say anyways. Thank you very much.
DJ Pohl is going to be next up. I'm going to use a little bit of time here to allow them to get the camera switched over. DJ, your response to Kelly Velonis' answer.
Thanks, Clint. So the first thing we need to do in the short term and the long term is create better jobs. Create jobs that have a living wage and address the wage issue short term and long term. And the other way we do that is funding social services so people can afford to work. This includes childcare and other expenses and supports as well. Access to training and education is also a way to help address these gaps that are existing, and supporting our small businesses through the small business recovery package that the NDP is offering to pay the employer portions of EI and CPP when rehiring or hiring new employees. Addressing all of these issues together in the short term and long term needs to be done in order to ensure that no working person is living in poverty. So the issue here is about good jobs that are good paying with a livable wage that someone can afford to live on and support a family on. That's the ultimate issue here. And that's what I would be fighting for our small businesses and for the workers at those businesses.
Thank you, DJ. The last minute and the last word on this particular question is going to go to Kelly. I'm going to remind the listeners, watchers, what the question was. Employers in a number of key sectors, tourism, hospitality, large industries requiring skilled workers, small businesses dependent on part-time workers are struggling. Many blame the continuation of the government's CERB as the problem. What's your party's plan to address this critical issue in the short and long term? You heard responses to your answer. Kelly, what do you have to say in a minute?
A few points on some of the responses. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit as a minority government was voted on by all parties. So just wanted to make that clear. As well, the Liberal government does want to see a $15 an hour wage across Canada for minimum wage. We need to raise that up, absolutely, for sure. And one other thing, Rob, just to make it clear, the provincial government of BC is the government that brought in the vaccine card. So I'm not sure how the Liberal government of Canada has any control over that. And perhaps if we had citizens adhering to these and not bombarding our citizens in business with parades down the street and calling them out, then perhaps people wouldn't be afraid to work and we would have more workers in our small businesses downtown.
Thank you so much for that. The next question has been selected for Rob Bogunovic. Rob, given the challenges facing employers that we've just talked about, is the expansion of immigration an option your party would support? Do you believe the current levels of immigration are too low, about right, or too high? You've got 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah, and I would like to very quickly just address something that Kelly just said. It was Trudeau, right on the eve of this election, who basically declared that they were going to force the vaccinations upon all federal employees and those in federally regulated industries. I know a lot of individuals who face losing their jobs because of that decree. So for her to say that that's the NDP government alone, it's the Liberals and the BC NDP that are pushing that issue. Regarding immigration, our position is that we should have numbers closer to what we had back in the mid-1990s, when we had probably around 150,000 coming in. We should be making sure that they are the ones coming in with the skills to augment our workplace needs. We need nurses, we need construction workers, we need these individuals to come in, but we need to make sure that they're not unbalancing things like our housing market when they arrive. When we bring in large numbers who come in with tremendous amounts of wealth, they buy up property because they're very motivated to do so, and they wind up creating strain both in Vancouver, Toronto, and the hinterland regions, as well as throughout the market. That's an issue, and that's hurting a lot of Canadians. We support immigration. We want to do immigration right. We want to make sure that individuals are not falling through the cracks. Too many times we've seen in recent years where the immigration system is basically saying that the immigrants coming in aren't being supported. The systems, the bureaucracies they have to interact with are convoluted and create all kinds of problems for them. Large numbers of them do not transition into being citizens in a fast and quick way because of how convoluted the system is. We want to address all of that. We want to make sure that they come, they're welcomed, they're supported, but they're at numbers that benefit Canada, not numbers that are presently hurting us, as we have seen in recent years.
Thank you so much for that. A response now to that question, Kelly Velonis.
I absolutely see immigrants as the backbone of this country. Everyone who lives in Canada is an immigrant. We are not the First Nations people here. Every immigrant that lives and works in Canada enriches this country's economic growth, enriches our country as the people that we are. I absolutely 100% disagree with everything that Rob has just said, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Rebuttal, Mark Strahl.
Thank you. So in a post-pandemic economic recovery, Canadian immigration should once again be rooted in our democratic values and inclusive, successful economic growth worthy of a real rebuilding and rising nation. It's simply not good enough to just set immigration levels without having a plan. I do think that the current immigration levels are about at the right level. And to secure Canada's future and restore Canada as the model immigration system for the world, we need to build a robust immigration system that welcomes the best and brightest from around the world to fill critical gaps and robustly grow our economy. We need to offer refuge to heroic human rights defenders and those fleeing persecution from around the world. We believe those people would enrich our national life, and we obviously should have done a better job, quite frankly, of rescuing those in Afghanistan who'd helped us. And we also want to strengthen Canadian families by reuniting them with their loved ones.
Thank you, Mark. Art Green, a response, please.
The Greens call for addressing systemic racism in immigration and refugee services by updating the Citizenship Guidebook and revising practices at the Canada Border Services Agency The party would review accreditation programs to recognize foreign training and education and provide funding to help employers hire newcomers. It calls for more accessible pathways to permanent residency for healthcare workers and would increase the number of accepted applications for the parent and grandparent program.
Thank you. And lastly, a rebuttal from DJ Pohl. I just maybe for context, Canada currently sets its immigration levels at about 250,000 people a year, somewhere in that neighborhood for the last few years. Is that, I believe that's correct. Mark's shaking his head. He's got a better number than that, but I may be wrong with that number, but it's higher than what was suggested. DJ?
Thank you. Immigration makes Canada stronger. We need to welcome new energy and talent to address the labor shortage that we just talked about in the last question. We need immigration to maintain the services. That includes certification processes for new immigrants. We will need workers for the new sectors, forestry management, the green economy, expanded healthcare. We need to welcome the talent and energy and increase immigration. And it needs to be rooted in fairness, respect, and dignity at all costs. And this includes resettling refugees, addressing the backlog that exists in our immigration system and reuniting families. And ensuring that we are, tying those experiences and contributions that people have welcome in our country. They make it diverse and they make it strong. And I'm fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was wrong. It was 284,387 in 2020. So it was a higher number than that. Rob, you get the last minute on this question. I'm going to remind folks what the question was. Given the challenges facing employers, is expansion of immigration an option that your party would support? Do you believe the current levels of immigration are too low, about right, or too high?
Yeah, I just want to speak to two things that I heard. One is from DJ, and I agree with a lot of what you say. But when you say that there's a backlog right now in the processing, there's a backlog because the present numbers are overwhelming the current systems. We have to pull back on the current number because it's currently just overwhelming the system. And I was going back on my mother's side of the family. I was in Canada, in British Columbia, before Confederation. So we have ancient roots in this land, not as ancient as the First Nations, but technically First Nations came from somewhere too. Everyone who lives in Canada is a Canadian if they are dedicated to our values. But the idea is what Kelly says, that everyone who lives in Canada is an immigrant. That's a pretty strange definition of the word immigrant. And I got to say, I'm getting tired of how liberals keep redefining the meaning of words.
Thank you very much. Our next question will be to Art Green. It's a question selected, or Al Green, Art Green. Many people cite climate change as the number one issue that they worry about moving forward. Some argue that the changes suggested by those who lean towards a greener economy would actually hurt the Canadian economy, already so reliant on resource revenues. Others would argue that the only way forward is reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and resource extraction. Where do you stand in this debate and why?
Well, it's become apparent or paramount, actually, that we begin to mitigate climate action immediately to make certain that our average global temperature doesn't rise past 1.5 degrees. Our plan is extremely aggressive and will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2030. And it's imperative that we do everything possible to deter people from burning fossil fuels. The best and most successful known measure for this is to create a carbon tax to a price that is sustainable and pays for the capture of it. We also need to electrify our transportation system so we would maintain our federal incentives on purchases of electric vehicles and speed up the ban on gas-powered vehicles by 2030. We would also immediately begin expansion of electric vehicle charging stations And we'd also implement a ban on fracking and remove all of the subsidies for oil and gas production and reinvest them into clean energy projects, including the petrochemical industry for production of lightweight components and accessories for electric vehicles and clean and renewable energy production. We'd also replace all or any lost jobs in the oil sector and replace them with high-paying green sector jobs as we convert to clean and renewables. We'd also cancel the TMX and BC's LNG project in northwestern BC, which will lower BC's carbon emissions by 35%. We'd also create building code amendments to maximize energy efficiency in new buildings, including minimum solar battery capabilities to supplement existing power grids, and creating effective electrical storage for outages and emergencies. We'd also create a diversified national energy grid of solar, wind, geothermal, and run-of-the-river to coincide with our existing hydroelectric system.
10 seconds.
It's imperative that we make these changes as our time is running out, and it's also an opportunity to transitioning and creating the greatest economic catalyst that the world will ever see. Thank you.
Thanks so much. In moving forward then, rebuttal to that question, we have Kelly Velonis first. Kelly?
The Liberal government is absolutely working to create a safer, cleaner environment for all Canadians. We are in a climate crisis. We will create green jobs in communities across Canada. We were the first ones to say there's a tax on pollution, and we will continue that. We will end plastic waste by 2030. We will boost clean and renewable power from coast to coast. We will cut pollution in heavy industry and ensure oil and gas sector is net zero by 2050. And we will protect more of our nature and oceans than we already have. We are committed to a cleaner, greener environment.
Thank you very much. Mark, your comments.
Thanks, Clint. I think the critical part of that question is that we need to support all jobs in all sectors of the economy from coast to coast to coast. Unfortunately, we've seen over the last number of years punitive legislation that has gone after our oil and gas sector and the women and men who feed their families on that. Many of them live in Chilliwack and commuted to work in the oil sands, which has invested in clean innovation, clean tech. We need to recognize that and support it. We need to ensure that we're not simply driving jobs out of our country into other countries that produce oil and gas in a much dirtier way than we do. So we need to support our women and men who work in sectors right across the country while cleaning up our environment, while tackling climate change. We have a comprehensive plan to do that in our Secure the Future platform. You can read it at conservative.ca/plan.
Thanks so much. Rob Bogunovic, your comments?
Yeah, I respect Arthur Green on this issue because I know he and the Green Party have been fighting against what they see as an existential threat to, the planet. I look at the data and I don't see an existential threat to the planet, but I do think that for those who believe that it is, they should be supporting measures to the level that the Green Party is advocating. A lot of what the other parties tend to advance are quarter measures that aren't even going to get us there. The problem that I have with the Green Party's position, apart from the fact that it seems to ignore China, which right now is producing more carbon dioxide than Canada, the United States, and Western Europe combined, is that a lot of these measures that they talk about, like getting rid of fossil fuels, will actually unbalance the agricultural industry across the globe, which relies on fossil fuels and presently relies on the greening that comes from higher levels of CO2. Agriculture could cause famines if it's disruptive, and I actually fear that pushing too hard will create the very famines that they've been warning about for so long.
Thank you. DJ, your comments?
Thank you. Climate change is the number one issue. The conversation is no longer jobs versus the environment. The conversation is jobs and the environment. And the options before us in this community to represent us, who's going to fight for this issue, are incumbent Mark Strahl, who voted against the Paris Agreement, and the Liberal government who presided over the worst GHG reduction effort in the G7. We have to do something different. This means tackling those three large emission targets: industry, buildings, and transportation, and doing so in a way that centers the community and the working people and pays attention to who's disproportionately impacted by climate change and how does reconciliation play into that, because it is extremely important. We must close the loopholes in the taxing on big polluters and end fossil fuel subsidies. This is urgent work. I've been holding leaders to account on climate change emissions and targets and reductions and environmental issues for years. And I'm really hoping that you'll support me to work on this for Chilliwack-Hope on this issue that I care so much about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DJ. Mr. Green, you have the last word on this subject. You have a minute.
Well, as far as the NDP's commitment for climate change, they're building a BC LNG plant in northwestern British Columbia that will increase BC's carbon output by 35%. So all the other measures that DJ is talking about won't make a bit of difference. And as far as Kelly being a climate leader, the TMX pipeline is a carbon stream that's going to pump billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere. So those two projects alone are going to put us over the top for any type of making our climate commitments. So it's a big stretch for the NDP and the Liberals to say that they're climate leaders at all. And as far as the petrochemical industry goes, we're going to have to expand it to produce the lightweight components and plastics needed for green energy production. And that cell phone that I'm talking to right now, that's captured carbon. That's not carbon that's pumped into the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for those responses to that question. The next question is to DJ, and this is a question that has come from people in the chamber. The government, with the support of all parties, has spent unprecedented amounts of money combating the pandemic. More recently, the government has increased additional spending so that we now have approximately a $350 billion deficit. What are your party's specific plans to deal with this deficit as we move forward out of this pandemic?
Great question. The pandemic has clearly highlighted gaps in services and supports that exist. Our social safety net is broken and it must be fixed long term. So the starting point there is absolutely not reducing any of those supports and services and increasing them. But the big question here is how are we going to pay for it? And ensuring that we tax the ultra rich and the 1% will bring in huge revenues that will actually ensure that we do not reduce any social support safety nets that we need, that we have seen that the pandemic has highlighted exist, and that we need to address long term so that we can be resilient and that our communities can be resilient and supportive of each other, with small businesses thriving and workers making a living wage, and addressing affordability, addressing things like healthcare for the long term will actually impact our costs and how they are impacted by this. But the revenues in terms of where they're coming from, raising capital gains inclusion and taxing the ultra rich and ensuring that the loopholes are closed on taxes for big polluters and big corporations. $78 billion in revenue was made during the pandemic by the most wealthy, and they need to pay their fair share. Workers in the working class and small businesses will not bear the brunt of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Strahl, I'll let you have first crack at a rebuttal.
Thank you. I think the number one thing you have to do to get out of a deficit is to stop digging. And I think the levels of spending, while they were necessary while we were doing the CERB and had people receiving those benefits, those now need to be brought under control. We've seen we're over $1.1 trillion in the national debt, $350 billion deficit with $100 billion of new spending in the budget, permanent new spending. This is a permanent expansion. This is no longer a pandemic response. So we've said that we will bring that deficit back to balance Within 10 years, we'll bring it to 85% reduction within 5 years. That's been costed out by the Parliamentary Budget Officer in our platform. We can do that without cuts to government programs, but simply by getting a handle on the out-of-control government spending that we've seen under the Liberal government.
Thank you. Rob Bogunovic, please.
When I hear DJ talk about increasing services and ignoring essentially the deficit that we're up against, it brings to mind Thomas Sowell's principle, where he said the first rule of economics is scarcity. There is never enough money to meet everyone's wants. And the first rule of politics is to ignore the first rule of economics. And I see that on display again and again with the policies of the NDP, the Liberals, and sometimes even the Conservatives. They seem to think there's an unlimited amount of money that can be spent. And in the case of the NDP, they have said that they're going to tax the ultra-rich and it will bring in huge revenue. Except the ultra-rich are really good at moving their money, and usually they pay as much as they want to pay. I support the idea of closing loopholes. I support the idea of ending corporate subsidies. Those are in our platform. But this idea that you can just tax the rich to raise the money is just absurd.
Thank you. We'll go to Kelly Vellunis, please. Kelly.
Thank you. The Liberal government already has lowered taxes for the middle class and raised them for the top 1%. And we will continue to close those loopholes as well. What we need is to invest in more jobs. We need to create more jobs to get our economy back on track. And we are investing to support almost 500,000 new training opportunities and jobs for youth and Indigenous. We will continue to support businesses in our most affected industries, which are tourism, our restaurants, and our arts and culture sectors. We need to bring these businesses back up and running, because when people are feeling better and going out, they're putting more money back into our economy. We need to accelerate investment in digital transformation of small and medium-sized businesses, and we need to put money into housing, help to build, repair, and support 35,000 affordable housing. When people can afford housing, our economy does better.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Green, please.
Yes, thank you. Basically, I think the country needs a new guaranteed revenue system for pandemics and any kind of emergency funding. We had a pretty good system with the EI system, but the governments don't want to use their own systems that they have now. But as far as job creation goes and creating a new economy, we can do that if we transition to a green economy. The transition to a green economy will be the greatest catalyst that the earth will ever see. Can you imagine if we have to retrofit all the buildings, electrify all the vehicles, electrify all our industries? The job creation that will create will create enough taxation revenue that will be able to pay for our debt. The way we're going right now, we just keep shoveling more money into the fire, and it's ridiculous. It's killing us, literally.
Thank you so much. DJ, you get the last word on this. I remind folks the question was, we're facing as a country a $350 billion deficit, and certainly all parties agreed that a portion of that was necessary as a result of a pandemic. But what are your party's specific plans to deal with that deficit? You get the last word.
Thank you. To get out of the hole that we find ourselves in, it's not a matter of stopping digging. It's a matter of getting the ladders back from the billionaires. And I encourage everyone to check out the revenue generating proposals that the NDP has posed. They actually outline what kind of revenue will be coming in and how. And ultimately, the revenue is guaranteed if we close those loopholes. I'm here to represent the people working in our community in Chilliwack-Hope, not the corporations, not the rich friends of the Liberals and the Conservatives. We can do better, and we absolutely must. And that is how we will work towards a balanced budget that represents everyone, ensures no working people, no small businesses are left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last of these questions in this section goes to Mark Strahl. Mark, the truth and reconciliation is a crucial part of Canada and our way forward. Learning to work effectively and build meaningful relationships with our Indigenous communities and partners could have a significant impact, not only in society as a whole, but for our economy as well. What actions will you and your party take to continue to make progress in this area?
Thanks, Clint. I do think that truth and reconciliation is one that has come to the forefront for Canadians after the discovery of unmarked burial sites at residential schools. And the Conservative government was the government that brought forward the national apology in Parliament under Stephen Harper. We set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was chaired by Dr. Sinclair. It was my honor to work as the Aboriginal Affairs Parliamentary Secretary on truth and reconciliation. And I think it is an ongoing process that all Canadians need to commit to as individuals and as governments. We've seen, quite frankly, too many governments of all stripes fail to capitalize on an appetite for change. We saw it after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out. There was a surge in an appetite for meaningful change. It fell by the wayside. We saw it again after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued their report. There was a dwindling of interest after that. So we cannot allow this latest situation where Canadians have demanded immediate action. We need to insist on that from our government, no matter what color it is, because for too long, too many governments have failed our Indigenous communities. We need to do better, and we need to work together to get it done.
Thank you. DJ, I'll give you the first word as a rebuttal.
Thank you. I agree. We have failed and we are failing, as highlighted by Mulak NDP MP outgoing when she highlighted what she's experienced as an Indigenous woman elected in this government. We have a lot of work to do and a lot of work to do locally, and building those relationships and creating the space to have the communication that works both ways in terms of what is required for true and meaningful reconciliation is incredibly important. And that has to be done from a place of respect and a place where you're operating nation to nation with respect to self-governance. Last election, the Liberals promised to lift all drinking water advisory bans, and that has not occurred. And that is a huge mispromise that absolutely should not be occurring. Healing the ongoing trauma caused by colonialism in residential schools will require long-term partnership and reliable ongoing funding. That's what I'm committed to.
Thank you very much. Art, your comments.
Yeah, it's embarrassing the way we've treated our Indigenous people. I mean, they're not our Indigenous people, they're their Indigenous people. And I even get mixed up in calling them our Indigenous people. It's the Indigenous people. And we should respect their land and their land claims. But one thing that really bothers me is that there's so many Indigenous places out there that they don't even have clean drinking water. There's places out there that have gone 40 years. The whole families have never actually had clean drinking water that they could drink out of their taps. Yet, we give them pretty words and we tell them, oh, we're going to help you and everything's going to be fine and dandy. But the reality is we don't care about them. We try and put them off. We should give them true honor and respect their nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rob Bogunovic, your thoughts.
Yeah, I really respect the work that Mark Strahl's dad did in bringing forth the apology. It was a historic moment. As one who's been teaching about residential schools since I began to teacher, I was really glad to see that we were finally acknowledging the great crime that was visited upon the Indigenous people. We need to make sure that the RCMP is independent in its investigation and not being interfered with by government officials or by just armies of lawyers who can obstruct, and basically when they get freedom of information requests trying to prove what was happening, they come back redacted. I think we need to make sure that we are showing respect for the individuals who are fighting for justice in this country by making sure that there are actual avenues for justice without the governments coming in and interfering in overt and really damaging ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last response, Kelly Velonis.
We need to confront the legacy of residential schools. We need to build trusting, respectful relationships with Indigenous leaders We need to continue our work to eliminate all the clean long-term drinking water advisories. I would like to point out that 108 have been lifted, and all in BC. This is not something that happens over in a day or a week. Some of them take years to overcome. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes along with that. And the Liberal Party is committed to making sure that every human in Canada has access to clean drinking water. We need to take action to confront systemic racism against Indigenous people, especially in the justice system and in our healthcare system. And we need to launch an Indigenous, urban, rural, and northern housing strategy. And last but not least, we need to protect the well-being of Indigenous children in this country.
Thank you so much. Last word to you, Mark, on this question, asking about truth and reconciliation, how we build meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities and partners, and what actions you outlined in your original answer. Anything that you've heard you'd care to respond to?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank and congratulate the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce for their leadership in building meaningful relationships with Chief David Jimmy and the Chilliwack tribes. They've been community leaders in showing us how it should be done. We can't have a paternalistic approach where an Ottawa knows best, so solutions are imposed on First Nations. This needs to be, whether it's on dealing with the unmarked graves, or whether it's talking about other things that have been raised in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. Ottawa imposing solutions is what got us into this trouble. It will not be what gets us out of it. So we need to work with Indigenous partners. They need to lead. We need to be respectful in those relationships. And we're so lucky in Chilliwack to have Strahl leaders who have shown us the way, and we need to partner with them to make sure we do this right.
Thank you so much. Thank you all candidates for sticking to the timelines. It was great. I apologize if there were, I don't think we had any technical glitches in that section, which is great. We're moving on to section 3, and this is the section I've kind of been looking forward to secretly. This is where candidates get to ask each other questions, and we have a list. We're going to start with Art Green, Kelly Velonis, then DJ Pohl, Mark Strahl, and Rob Bogunovic. You get to pick which candidate you'd like to respond. The other candidates will also get a chance to respond, and then the original questioner can reply as well. And I'll try to keep this moving along. The response is limited to 2 minutes, and the original response is 2 minutes, and then other folks who want to chime in get 1 minute to do that. So the first question is going to Art Green. Art, why don't you tell us who the question is for and give us your question.
DJ Pohl, in regards to childcare, both you and the Prime Minister have said that you're committed to $10 a day daycare, which is totally unsustainable. And it's too expensive for those who actually need it. So if I'm a working mom and I'm making $15 an hour and I've got 2 kids, it'll cost me $100 a week out of my $600 a week salary for daycare. How is that affordable? And if I belong to a family that's making over $100,000 a year, I get the same deal. How is that sustainable? Why don't we have a childcare system that works on taxable benefit so that it's free at source, and then everybody gets a tax receipt at the end of the year for the actual value of the real value of the service?
Art, I think we need to give DJ a chance to answer the question. The question shouldn't be longer than the time given for the answers. And I think the question is about childcare, DJ. I think you got the essence of that question. Your response, and then I'll give Kelly, Mark, and Rob a chance to answer as well. DJ?
Thank you. Yes, the NDP is absolutely committed to a $10 a day childcare platform as a starting point, and then reducing it to nothing. These are issues that absolutely need to be addressed. As we saw, COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting women. We saw them leaving the workforce in massive numbers. And a lot of that had to do with having to make very difficult decisions around finding or being able to afford childcare, staying at work, balancing homeschooling. And that was a crisis that was before the pandemic, but has just been highlighted and exacerbated since. $10 a day childcare will boost the economy because women will be working and will no longer be disproportionately impacted by some of those discussions around finances that have to occur. This will generate good wages. And again, it's just a starting point in how we make affordability and availability for childcare for all people in our community. Chilliwack and Hope, there is absolutely a need for a supply of inclusive and available childcare spaces that are affordable. And we absolutely have to be working towards this because the alternative around tax credits or whatnot are proven to not be working. They're not working. The loopholes that exist in our tax system need to be addressed and need to be fixed in a progressive way that addresses this. But absolutely, the $10 a day childcare will actually boost the economy, get more people to work, especially women in the workforce. And it's absolutely essential to affordability in Chilliwack-Hope. And thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. We'll give Kelly Velonis 1 minute to respond to that answer. Kelly?
Thank you. There's a lot of what DJ just said that I absolutely 100% agree with, and that's why the Liberal government has worked with provinces and territories to bring $10 a daycare to light. Our goal is to reduce daycare costs by 50% in the next year and working towards $10 a daycare within the next 5 years. Women have absolutely been disproportionately represented, and during this pandemic, we have seen that. To make the choice of whether you can afford to work or not, or afford to pay your daycare, tax benefits, tax credits don't help. They don't help when you're choosing whether you're going to pay your rent, pay your childcare, or put food on your table. Absolutely, is there a need for $10 a day daycare? This will increase our economy with more women and more people being able to go back to work.
Thank you. Mark Strahl, your thoughts.
Well, Conservatives believe that parents are best able to determine the best childcare arrangement for their children, and that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for every family. And that's why we've said that we will convert the Canada Childcare Expense Deduction into a refundable tax credit, covering up to 75% of the cost of childcare for lower-income families. This will massively increase the support that lower-income families receive and provide more assistance to almost all families. We'll also pay out the deduction over the course of the year so that families don't have to pay the cost of childcare and then get the money back when they pay their taxes. A family with an income of $30,000 can today claim a maximum of $1,200. Under our plan, they'll receive up to $6,000, and it goes on. So we have a plan that will benefit all parents in all regions of the country, not just those that can access 9-to-5 government-run daycare.
Thank you. Rob Bogunovic, your thoughts.
Yeah, the People's Party believes that we have a lot of the other parties operating outside of the lane of the federal powers. I believe this is an issue for the provinces, and it's interesting to note that the first fully funded $10 a day daycare program was actually being operated out of Quebec. It was the provincial government that created it, and now we're trying to bring it in at a federal level. The problem we have with that is that it removes you from the children themselves, a whole nother level of government, and we believe that children are best served closest to their community. A statement that it takes a village to raise a child, a village, not an empire. The further away you get from the child, the less connection you have and the less care that child is likely to receive. I think there's a real danger in letting the federal government dictate how people are raising their kids or trying to fund this. It should be in the provincial jurisdiction. We want to make sure they have the tax credits so that they can run that, properly.
Thank you. Art, you asked the original question. Your thoughts. You have 1 minute to follow up.
Well, I can say being involved in daycare, finding daycare for families, that we need to put more money into those who are actually looking after the kids. how do we get quality daycare attendants if we're only paying them minimum wage? This system of $10 a day daycare does nothing to help us actually improve the system. What we really need is we need expanded facilities and expanded trainees that can actually look after the kids properly. So I'm a little bit put off by the notion that $10 a day daycare does that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. The next question is for Kelly Velonis. Kelly, who would you like to ask a question of?
Thank you, Clint. Mark, my question is for you tonight. My question is, do you feel that you are standing up for those that are following the COVID guidelines, the government regulated and the public health order guidelines, when you sided with anti-vaxxers? Small businesses don't get to make that choice. Supporting the cancellation of tomorrow night's event, does your party expect small businesses to shut their doors if someone refuses to wear a mask? Or do they expect them to follow what their government orders have said?
Thank you, Mark.
Of course, I did no such thing. I did not support canceling the event. I supported that all of us, all 5 candidates, would be given the same opportunity to appear on the same platform. And as we've seen from the technical difficulties tonight, it would have been grossly unfair for one person during a debate to be forced to be outside of the building. And the real issue here is that the Liberal government, it's the Prime Minister that decided to break his promise to Canadians. He promised Canadians that he would not call an election during a pandemic. The reason that the Cultural Centre had to cancel their debate is because we are having an election in the middle of a pandemic, which is Justin Trudeau's doing and Justin Trudeau's doing alone. What I said is we should all be treated equally and that we should appear on a virtual debate just like today. I would have been there tomorrow night at the appropriate time to debate and put forward my ideas and answer those questions. At no time did I advocate canceling the event. At no time did I see anyone else advocate canceling the event. It was simply a matter of ensuring that everyone was treated equally. And I just can't see how during an election we can accept, when we're talking about democratic rights and the fundamentals of democracy, that we can have this sort of event created where one candidate can't come and the others can. So quite simply, my solution was, let's treat everyone equally. It had nothing to do with the vaccine mandates, vaccine passports. It had everything to do with equality. There was a way forward for us to have the debate in an equal, equitable manner. And I'm sorry that the Cultural Centre didn't take us up on it.
Art, your response to that answer?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Mark is saying. I've double vaxxed myself, and it's the thing for me to do because of health issues and family that's around me and whatnot that have health issues. So I go out of my way to make sure that everybody around me is safe as well as myself. But the biggest problem here is that we need, all of us, we need to start working together. This partisanship politics is actually killing the country. We need a more proportional system of government so that we don't get into these situations, so that we can make a consensus between all of us, so that we don't have to leave somebody out that definitely deserves not to be left out. So, yeah, I agree with a lot what Mark is saying. But, there's a safety and health issue that goes along with it, and I respect that, and so I go along with it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Bogunovic, your thoughts?
Yeah, and again, Mark, I thank you for the stance that you took because you stood up for a fair platform in an election. This was thrown upon us by the NDP partway through, right after the writ was dropped. And again, Trudeau ignored the will of Parliament in calling an early election. But the NDP just suddenly come out and declare that we're going to have vaccine passports after months of saying that we weren't going to have them. And then the debate was basically delayed because of the chaos trying to organize until, just after this mandate came in. I think people have the right to be very mad about the mandate, especially since we were lied to. We were told we weren't going to have one. And I note that when the NDP had their provincial election, they didn't interfere in that election with a bunch of new measures. They actually brought those in one day after they won their majority government. So I have questions.
Thank you very much. DJ, your thoughts?
Thank you. I do think that Mr. Strahl could have reasonably predicted that by stating he would not attend in person, that the alternative to that and the answer for the organizers would have been to have to cancel. It's an in-person event at the Chilliwack Cultural Center. Those folks are doing great work in the community and creating accessibility to democracy, which is something I absolutely support and we need more of in this community to ensure that all the voters who can only attend accessible, may not have the technology available, have that opportunity to ask questions of candidates in this election. It's of the utmost importance that we increase access to democracy, be available, be accessible, doing so in a safe way. And I absolutely stand behind that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, you get the last word here. 1 minute to wrap up.
Thank you. I absolutely see it as a way to stop the democratic process as well. And Mark, perhaps I see it as a way of you not wanting to lose some of those right voters and try to keep them happy at the same time. I'm not sure. And as for us calling an election, after 14 non-confidence votes, it's proven that as a minority government, we are having difficulty even making any laws and rules go forward. This is the time to put a majority government in place so we won't be faced with this again.
Thank you. The next question is DJ Pohls. DJ, you get to ask a candidate a question.
Thank you. My question is also for Mark Strahl. Do you support a mandatory national vaccine passport program as a means of getting us out of the COVID-19 crisis and getting business and society back to normal?
Mark?
Thank you very much. What we have said is that we support the vaccine for every Canadian who wants to get one. They should have full and complete access to it. And we were very critical of the government for their delays in getting the vaccine at the beginning of this. That said, we don't have mandatory vaccinations in this country. And the idea that Justin Trudeau, who had months to do this, and in May said that people who had religious concerns, people who had medical concerns, and people who were just fundamentally opposed to vaccines shouldn't have to take it, the day before an election decides that he's in favor of vaccine mandates. Now, I would say to DJ, I have seen a number of union leaders standing up for their workers in the public service and saying that there is no ability for the federal government to demand that they be vaccinated, that they will demand, based on their collective agreements, that there is accommodations. So what we have said is that there should be accommodations, not discrimination. We should, yes, encourage vaccinations, but for those who are unable or unwilling to be vaccinated, we should offer alternatives like screening and rapid testing. That is something that WestJet, for instance, has said that they believe should be offered to passengers on their flights who are not vaccinated. They have said they propose a robust rapid testing system. So Justin Trudeau knows that he cannot impose a national mandate on the public service because the unions won't allow it. And the travel, the airlines, for instance, are already looking for accommodation. So this division, discrimination of demanding this or threatening to fire people if they don't get a vaccine, we reject that. We have said that vaccines are good, but there needs to be workarounds for those who are unable to get a vaccine.
Thank you very much. Kelly Velonis, your comments.
The Liberal Government of Canada absolutely supports mandatory vaccines on planes, trains, and in federal public service. Our number one goal at the beginning, and will continue to be, is to keep Canadians safe. The cost difference between vaccines and rapid testing, Mr. Strahl, have you done your homework on that one? Because it's quite a big difference. And at the end of it, rapid testing doesn't stop the spread of COVID-19, which doesn't stop the hospitalizations, which continues to put extra weight on our already overworked healthcare system and extra dollars on our healthcare system as well. Rapid testing does nothing to start herd immunity and to stop COVID-19.
Thank you. Rob Bogunovic, I suspect you have thoughts on this issue.
I have lots of thoughts on this issue. We are against the vaccine passport. We are very much against the vaccine passport. It's nobody else's business what medical treatments we have chosen to have. And it's a great violation. And we used to have parties in this country that actually respected that, your right to privacy, your right to life, liberty, security of the person. It's really stunning that we find ourselves in this place now where all of those rights are being thrown under the bus. I really question whether or not we can justify this based on the idea that it was necessary for public health, because so much of what this government and the governments at the provincial level have been doing makes no sense based on public health. They put police tape around playgrounds, closed down the gyms. We've seen a massive increase in diabetes, weight gain, heart disease is going to be on the rise. We canceled cancer screenings. We have more teen depression, anxiety, suicide. How is this public health?
Thank you. Art Green, your response, please.
First of all, I do support the vaccine passport. I actually have one myself. However, saying that, I don't believe that we have the right to mandate every person to do that. There's a lot of people that can't for whatever reason, and a lot of people that are just suspect of it. I mean, I've never had even a flu shot before this pandemic, but I did get vaccinated because it was the thing to do, and I'm a team player, and it was recommended by the party. But it's not our bottom line. We believe that we should give people their right to say, we know what we're doing. As a matter of fact, I just had an accident. I had a broken neck, and I had to spend 3 nights in a merge because all the beds in the hospital were taken. So,
Okay. I'll ask you to wrap up, Art.
Okay.
Okay. DJ, you get the last word here. 1 minute.
Thanks. I didn't actually hear a direct answer on the passport question from Mr. Strahl, but passports work. We saw vaccinations increase, and unions certainly support whatever will ensure we get out of this crisis and ensure that people are protected. And rapid testing, as was mentioned by Kelly, is reactionary, not preventative. And we need to do all that we can to ensure our vulnerable populations are safe from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to end this crisis now.
Thank you. Next question goes to Mark Strahl. Mark, who would you like to direct your question to?
My question's for Art Green. Art, many Canadians who tuned into the recent English leaders debate were very impressed by your leader, Anna May Pohl. She was devastating in her criticism of Justin Trudeau, especially when she called him out as a fake feminist for how he kicked strong women out of the Liberal Party, people like Selena Cesar-Chabanez, Dr. Jane Philpott, and of course, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Over the last number of weeks, some of the Green Party's national organizers have been obstructing Ms. Paul's leadership, denying her funding to run a national campaign, firing her staff, and undermining her in the media. From all appearances from the outside, Ms. Paul has proven herself to be a very capable, competent leader. But many Canadians are asking why they should support the Greens if the Greens don't support their own leader. So I'm just wondering what your answer to that question might be.
Art?
Well, I know Anna May personally, and I can tell you she's an incredible leader. And she's an incredible politician who has great foresight of what this country actually needs. And of course, the Green Party, it's tough sometimes being a Green. This is my 5th election, either provincially or federally, and you don't always get the results you want. So it's easy to criticize, what doesn't happen for you. But I can tell you personally that Anna May Pohl is the perfect leader for the Green Party of Canada. She stepped up to the plate at the debate, like Mark said. Obviously, Mark is proud of her as well as I am. So, let's give her a break. Let's let her lead the party. We're not going to get the results this election that we were maybe hoping for, but we'll never quit. And you can ask my friend Rob there. He'll tell you that I'm going to stick with the Green Party and my party as long as it takes. And we're going to fight for climate justice. And we're going to fight for, Indigenous rights and social justice, participatory democracy, ecological wisdom, respect for diversity, nonviolence, and sustainability. Because that's who we are, and that's what Annemie supports, and that's what we support as a party, and we're going to stand with her as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Bogunovic. You were mentioned by Art Green. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, and I thank you, Art. As I say, I respect the passion and the fight that's in the Green Party. Much like the People's Party, you are out there trying to slay your Goliath, and we have a different Goliath that we're trying to slay, but we like the fight that we see in the Green Party, and we like the fact that you're standing strong for your values. I see that in your leader, and I see that, in so many of the members of your party. The People's Party always believes that individuals should vote for their values. And we know that means not everyone's going to vote for us. But we also believe that if everybody was voting for their values, we would already be living in a much better world than we are in today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelly Velonis, your thoughts on Annemie Pohl?
Well, that was actually a great question that Mark posed to Art, because I think a lot of us were wondering what was going on in the Green Party scene. It looked like it was imploding. I have to say, Art, your passion and your commitment to your cause, to your party, and to your leader is very commendable.
Thank you. DJ, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I feel what would really help this situation, ensuring that all voices are heard, is electoral reform and proportional representation. Justin Trudeau promised that the 2015 election would be the last person to pass post the election, and that was a failed election promise. And that means that we are not hearing those Green voices represented in a way that they could be with electoral reform. I commit to fighting for that if elected, because it's of the utmost importance to ensure that no one is left behind and all voices are heard.
Thank you. Mark, you get the last word on this question. Did you get an answer you liked?
Well, I always enjoy Art's passion, and I'm glad to hear that he's supportive of Annemie Pohl. I think Canadians saw her take the gloves off and fight for her values, and quite frankly, I think she did an excellent job of once again talking about Justin Trudeau talking a good game but failing to deliver, especially when it comes to feminism, where he has kicked out Joy Wilson-Raybould, Dr. Jane Philpott, and Selena Cesar-Chavanez. So she called him out. She did so very effectively, and I think we need those kind of voices around the table at the debates. Leaving aside the debacle that is the Electoral Debates Commission, maybe that's another question for another day. But I was glad that Art was able to clear up the fact that the party is squarely behind Ms. Pohl.
Thank you so much. Last question in this series goes to Rob Bogunovic. Rob, who would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I would like to direct my question to Kelly Velonis. Kelly, liberalism is supposed to protect rights and oppose government tyranny. You support the majority trampling upon the rights of the minority, and you don't support our right to life, liberty, security of the person, free speech, freedom of assembly, or our mobility rights. Liberals today always seem to redefine words to mean something else. Could you please define what liberalism means to you?
Kelly?
Well, what it means to me is to support all Canadians, but always ensuring that all Canadians are protected and safe, which sometimes mean that some Canadians' values are not the ones that we're going to follow through, such as the People's Party values. The majority of Canadians do not support your values, and they will never form a government. Most Canadians want to ensure that Canadians are safe, which we have proved to do through this pandemic. I absolutely 100% support the rights and freedoms from our charter.
Thank you. Mark Strahl, comments on that question or the answer?
Yeah, I think I won't try to define what Kelly believes liberalism should be, but I will say that I think it is something that Charter of Rights and Freedoms needs to be there for all Canadians. And I think when the majority is already protected, and it's the minorities that that need to be protected and have relied upon the Charter since it came into force to have their rights protected against the majority. And so I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that, again, as Justin Trudeau said in May, that we don't have, for instance, mandatory vaccinations in Canada. We need to respect the healthcare choices of Canadians. I think we need to make sure that we're not unduly trampling on the rights of individuals who may make a different choice than we would like them to make.
DJ, your thoughts?
Thank you. The Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms absolutely needs to be upheld, but they cannot be used to infringe upon someone else's right, especially in a situation where people are made to feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own community. And certainly the tension and the division that we're experiencing in Chilliwack-Hope is significant, and people deserve to feel safe. And so if that is a limit on that, that is acceptable to ensure that those rights and freedoms are not used to infringe upon someone else's rights and freedoms.
Thank you. Art.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I've always been a fan of Mark, and but historically, my family has always voted Liberal, and though obviously I'm not a Liberal anymore, but I would have to say that Kelly, she works really hard. She does her best. She gets the party's platform out there. She's a very contendable candidate and probably has the best chance of dethroning Mark. If I was to vote strategically, per se, I would probably vote for Kelly Velonis. But like I say, Mark is, I've always been a defender of Mark's policy, even though we're diametrically opposed on just about every issue there is. But thanks.
Thank you so much. Last word goes to you, Mark.
Is that Mark?
Unless you're giving me two chances at it.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you. I believe that the person who, or sorry, Rob. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, but no, you don't get two chances.
Right. Thank you. Well, once again, Kelly, I think I have a problem with the definition that you brought into your answer. I don't know what your definition of protection is. And as for DJ, you say that we need to make sure that people don't feel unsafe and unwelcome in their own communities. I feel unsafe and unwelcome in this community right now. That's one of the reasons why we're not having a debate tomorrow, because I wasn't welcomed. And we've seen a system where churches have been shut down, in-person religious services, temples, mosques, all sorts of people have been made to feel unsafe and unwelcome because of the measures that are being imposed upon them during this COVID pandemic. And it's the measures, not the COVID. The measures are the ones that are doing so much of the damage to our country. So if I have been unvaccinated and your vaccines work, what danger am I to you?
Thank you so much for that. As expected, that was a very interesting and enjoyable session where each of you got to ask questions that were on your mind. And thank you for spreading them all around. Sometimes an incumbent can take quite a beating in a session like that. This time, I think we got some really good diversity in the questions and certainly in who was asked. We're going now into the last section before I give you a chance to wrap up. And these are public questions. And I want to just stress again that we're using an online platform called Slido, sli.do, where people can go to that site, use the hashtag debate Chilliwack, I believe, hashtag debate Chilliwack, all lowercase, and you can follow the instructions and either like a question, which moves it up the ladder a little bit, or ask your own question. I'm going to continue with a format of asking in turn, and I'll tell you who that is right now so you can prepare. The first question will be for Mark. The second question will be for Art. The next question will be for Kelly, then DJ, then Rob, and we'll just complete that until we begin to run out of time. You have 2 minutes for your answer to these questions, and each candidate can offer a rebuttal to 2 answers that they've heard, but only 2. So I'm going to try desperately to keep you on the straight and narrow with this one, although you've seen already that I can be tripped up pretty easily. But I'm going to try my best to keep you to 2 rebuttals if you'd like to use them. And we'll move forward from there. The first question that I have, and this is for Mark Strahl, is Indigenous education is a federal responsibility and must be a priority for our MPs. Will you commit to supporting increased funding for Indigenous schools? Will you commit to supporting First Nations control over First Nations education? And will you commit to implementing the Indigenous Languages Act? Mark.
Thank you for that question. Whoever submitted that, I appreciate it. Actually, when I was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, we brought forward a piece of legislation called the First Nations Control of First Nations Education Act, which would have revolutionized the way that we funded Indigenous education in the country and would have set up similar school boards, for instance, that we have in non-Indigenous communities to ensure that students and teachers were getting the resources that they need. So absolutely. For too long, there's been an underfunding, there's been a funding gap that absolutely needs to be addressed and rectified. Indigenous students deserve to have the same level of education that non-Indigenous students have, because we know how important a grade 12 education is in the workforce. And those that do not have that, their economic prospects drop off a cliff. And we need to support not only Indigenous students, but Indigenous schools, Indigenous teachers, and the Indigenous communities that they are built in. So absolutely, the Languages Act, we are supportive of that. We've been supportive of initiatives in that regard, because once a language is gone, it's gone forever, and we need to ensure that we provide significant support. We've seen that happen, for instance, in the House of Commons, where we have had Indigenous language interpreters brought in when we've had the privilege of having members of Parliament who speak an Indigenous language. So we need to support that. It's so critical to the culture. Language equals culture in lots of cases. We see that across the country. So we support that. Absolutely, it's critical, a part of reconciliation to ensure that First Nations students are funded at the same level as non-Indigenous students in Canada.
Thank you so much for that. Would anybody care to offer a comment, or are you saving? Awesome. Thank you. The next question is for Art Green. Art, will your party respect the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
Well, of course. What's there not to respect?
It was a question that has risen up the ranks to be the first question on the list. So if your answer is, of course, that's great. We'll move on to another question. Anyone wish to challenge that? I wasn't sure anyone would. Kelly, the first question for you is, how do you justify Justin Trudeau's decision to call an election in the middle of a pandemic with wildfires burning and a crisis unfolding in Afghanistan? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Like I previously said, there was over 14 non-confidence votes recently, which goes to show that the other parties were heading down this road and wanting this election more than the Liberal Party did. Canada is at a crossroads. Justin Trudeau believes it was important for Canadians to weigh in on our future in a post-pandemic Canada. I understand it's frustrating. I wasn't hoping for an election right now either, but I also appreciate that Canadians can have their voices heard and that you can vote on issues that are important to you in Chilliwack and Hope, and make sure that your voices are heard in Ottawa instead of always hearing the voice of Ottawa to Chilliwack and Hope. These are issues that we can discuss tonight and discuss further. I look forward to anybody reaching out to me at my campaign office or contacting me via social media. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment? Mark?
Yeah.
And DJ?
I just think it's ridiculous to say that because an opposition party voted against anything that the Liberals did, that somehow that justified this election. The Prime Minister and the Liberal Party had maintained the confidence of the House. The fact that the opposition parties at different times voted against different measures did not cause the government to fall. So the idea that this is anything but Justin Trudeau's fault is absolutely categorically false. We have the right to vote against the government and express a lack of confidence, but if the government maintains the confidence of the House, the mandate continues. So the idea that he would break his word, his solemn word that he would not call an election and instead called it in the middle of the fourth wave is entirely on Justin Trudeau, and he should pay a price for that kind of arrogance.
Thank you. DJ, you wish to comment as well?
Yes,
And
thank
Art,
you.
thank you.
On this issue, there seems to be some confusion around the provincial and federal NDP, given the provincial NDP called an election during the pandemic as well. And the voters decided whether that was the right thing to do or not, as they will do here. But I will say the abandoned promises on the federal level by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government is excessive. And in a time where we have so much work to do and that work just stops, and it's not about the policy, this is entirely about power. The minority government was working quite well, and the NDP was ready to work and get to work and push for the good legislation that we were seeing come out during this pandemic that were needed to help people. 14 votes of non-confidence is not a lot in a minority government. It certainly happens, and the minority government was working, and we had a lot of work to do that we have stopped to do this specifically for the Liberals to grab more power.
Thank you so much. Art Green, you wanted to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I'm a little dismayed at the Liberal government not knowing what was going on in Afghanistan to begin with. I mean, this wasn't a hidden thing that we were going to pull out. They knew that Biden was planning to pull out months ahead of time. You would think that they would have some sort of contingency plan to get all those citizens out of there safely. But we waited until the last minute, maybe hoping that it wasn't going to happen, or we were too preoccupied about having an election during the damn pandemic that, it just boggles my mind why we didn't get this right. We should have been heroes there. Canada used to be peacekeeping heroes. I don't understand how the Liberal government fumbled the football on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question then, if no one else wishes to comment on this one.
I'd like to comment.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned was that when they called the election, it was the shortest possible term for an election allowable under the law. And Elections Canada did not have any heads up. They weren't allowed to rent office space, and it took them about a week to get working phones and computers. And this, when I was in the first days of this election trying to get answers, we couldn't get answers because they were simply swamped. Now, if we're going to have a short election, shouldn't we at least give Elections Canada the heads up? I know the Liberals gave their candidates the heads up to rent office space, but they didn't tell Elections Canada, whose job it is to safeguard our election, that they were going to be having election, go get offices, go get phones and computers up and running. I think that is outrageous, and it makes me wonder whether or not Trudeau actually does believe in a fair and functioning democracy.
Thank you very much. That's everybody who can comment. So we're going to move on to the next question, which of course is for DJ. DJ, the question is, over 60 years ago, the oil pipeline was built through Chilliwack without being aware of the aquifer that it was crossing. Trans Mountain plans to not only twin this pipe, but increase the oil load on the old pipe. Would you work to help reroute this pipeline away from our city's water source?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. The rerouting is step number one in our transition away from the fossil fuel industry. This is something that our community has been working on for, I believe 2013 was one of the first review board hearings that we had where these concerns were being raised. The pipeline crosses are underneath our aquifer, underneath schools, across our river. There are homeowners who have been battling with this, and we've been having hearings after hearings, and it absolutely needs to be at the very least rerouted, if not opposed entirely, as the market essentially may not be there by the time we spend all that money move towards this. This is something I've been engaged in the community for, like I said, 9 or so years now. And it's such an important topic that means a lot to everyone in Chilliwack-Hope. It's one of the first issues that came across my plate in the labor movement around how do we ensure that we have the workers who are impacted by a project like this to the table? How do we get them to the table to have that discussion that it's not an attack on that livelihood and it is about all of our livelihoods, and how do we move forward together? Ultimately, the Liberal government bought the pipeline and we now own that. That never should have happened. And we must do everything we possibly can to ensure that our valuable water sources are protected at all costs. If we lose that, we may never get it back. And the impact is catastrophic in our beautiful Fraser Valley. We must do all that we can to protect it.
Thank you so much. Anyone wish to comment on DJ's answer or that question? Seeing none, then I'll move on to Rob Bogunovic, your first question.
I have a card up here.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you're blocked. You're blocked in my monitor. Okay, that's Kelly, I'm assuming,
yes,
is it?
Yes,
okay.
I have a card up.
Yeah,
I just was a little confused as to whether it was step one for the federal NDP party or if it was step one for DJ Pohl if she is the MP. When I ran in 2019, I worked with Water Wealth and I submitted an application to reroute the pipeline because it's always been something that's very important to me. And I said then, and I say now, I will continue that fight because that pipeline does need to be rerouted out of our aquifer and twinned in a safer place along the highway.
Thank you. Anyone else? Awesome. Thank you so much. The question for Rob Bogunovic then is, Indigenous education is a federal responsibility. You'll recognize this question from previously. Yep. And it must be a priority for MPs. Will you commit to supporting increased funding for Indigenous schools? Will you commit to supporting First Nations control over First Nations education? Will you commit to implementing the Indigenous Languages Act?
Yeah, and I think that the People's Party has no trouble committing to that on every level because the People's Party believes that government is best served by the people when they have direct control over their own lives and their own affairs. We want as much government in the hands of the communities as possible, not this top-down federal government oversight. It was that approach that led to the residential schools in the first place. Blue Quills was the first school that ever broke away from that residential school model. They had to fight against John Chrétien and Pierre Trudeau in order to get the right to run their own school, to teach their own children, and they've been very successful. I think that Aboriginal people, when they have control over their own affairs, they will do well. And we need to make sure that we give them every opportunity and the supports they need, but allow them to be accountable to themselves and to manage themselves. That's how the PPC wishes to approach communities all across Canada.
Thank you so much. Any comments from anyone? I'm assuming you would have commented when Mark answered. Awesome. The next question then goes to Mark Strahl. Affordability. What does your party plan to do to address the ever increasing cost of living?
Thanks, Clint, and thanks to the people that submitted that and upvoted it. I think the first thing, the largest thing that most people think of when they think of affordability is either their mortgage payment or their rent. And we have a solid housing plan that has been endorsed by many experts across the country as the best plan of the parties. And that is because our plan relies on private sector. We've said that we will also release federal government properties. There's 37,000 properties that the federal government owns. We've said that we can release some of that to build housing. We've said that we will put a ban on foreign buyers who don't intend to live on Canada for a period of 2 years to see if that can drive down the speculators, keep those folks who don't intend to live here but buy a home, take away a home from a Canadian family, reduce the supply for a Canadian family, which increases the demand. So we've also said that we will couple federal infrastructure dollars to increasing housing density along infrastructure projects for rapid transit, and we will encourage two ways to increase rental housing stock. One is to encourage foreign investors not to buy single-family homes that they don't intend to live in, but to invest in rental property projects. We've also said that those who have rental property projects, if they take their money out of if they sell a rental project and they invest it in a new rental project, they can defer the capital gains. And unlike the Liberal Party, we have no intention of ever bringing in a tax on the capital gains for the sale of your primary residence. So that's how we would address housing and affordability.
Thank you so much. Would anybody like to comment on that question? DJ?
Yes, thank you. Affordability and cost of living is top of mind for absolutely everyone. And housing certainly is a piece of that, and ensuring that we have available, accessible housing for everyone, especially our seniors and people living with disabilities who are facing skyrocketing rents and evictions, and young families who cannot even enter the housing market. Addressing healthcare and the gaps that exist in healthcare is something that will make life more affordable for everyone. No one should be having to make decisions about whether they can afford their prescription medication or their groceries or their rent. That is an impossible situation. We should have had pharmacare included already. And the Liberal and the Conservative government teamed up to vote that down. And this includes dental and vision coverage as well. No one should be having to pay so much out of pocket for their health. And we absolutely need to address affordability on all these levels: housing and groceries, protect supply management so that our groceries.
That's the end of your time, DJ. Sorry. We're getting ruthless here. Anyone else wish to comment on affordability? All right, we'll move on then. If some of your monitors, I can't quite see you, so if you're waving your card, also maybe shout something out too, and then I'll make sure I see you. The next question, of course, is for Art Green. Good evening, Art. Please confirm and guarantee, if elected, for vital health, safety, and economic reasons, you will inform the Canadian Energy Regulator to decommission the present high-risk 60-year-old pipeline, and, as in other jurisdictions, reroute our pipelines, keeping them adjacent to Highway 1.
Well, if the Green Party forms government, we'll put an end to the TMX pipeline right away. And we'll also shut down the LNG project in northwestern BC. And these are vital things that we have to do. If we were going to keep our survivability on the earth, we have to get rid of these energy projects outright. It's not to say that we don't need the petrochemical industry. We do. We will enhance the petrochemical industry. We'll make it bigger and stronger, and we'll hire more people. But we'll be using those industries to build carbon captured products, things lightweight products that we can use in electric vehicles, lightweight components for clean and renewable energy. But we will not burn carbon or inject carbon into the atmosphere. We absolutely have to stop that. We have no choice. We've got to get to net zero by 2050. I would prefer to see net zero by 2030. But because, all we get from the other parties is promises that we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but nothing ever happens. Our carbon emissions are higher than they ever been. It doesn't matter if it's the NDP or the Liberals or even the Conservatives. We have to get out of the carbon burning industry. Otherwise, we're hooped.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment on that particular question? Thank you. I see a question that's reoccurring to be asked for all candidates, and I'm not sure the point of the question, but I'm going to deviate just a little bit. The question is, will your party respect the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Can I ask, is there anybody whose party may not respect the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom and would like to answer that question? That's great. I didn't think so. I will move on then. This question now is for Kelly. Good evening, Kelly. Please confirm and guarantee, if elected, the same question that Art just received, that for vital health, safety, and economic reasons, you will inform the Canadian Energy Regulator to decommission the present high-risk 60-year-old pipeline and reroute our pipeline to keep them adjacent to highways. Kelly.
Thank you, Clint. And as I said earlier, in 2019, when I first ran for the Liberal Party, I worked with Water Wealth and I did put in an application to reroute the pipeline, and I will continue that work if elected. And even if not elected, I will work with all parties to make sure that this is something that does happen, because along with DJ and with Art, I believe that our environment is in crisis. And the last thing we need to do is have a pipeline going over our aquifer and affecting our water source.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment on that? I'm assuming not, since you would have previously. The next question is for DJ. Would you please, DJ, address the issue? What does your party plan to do to address the ever-increasing cost of living?
Yes, I started responding to this earlier, so I will expand on that as well. Specifically on the housing issue, we have people in our community who are unhoused. We have people, renters who are struggling at living paycheck to paycheck. We have young families looking to try to purchase their first home, and it doesn't seem like it's a reality that is possible. And so there's a number of things that we can do, addressing the barriers at all those entry points into housing to ensure that people can afford to have a safe, affordable place to live, because that is a fundamental of affordability as well as the healthcare that I talked about previously. And so this means increasing the supply and demand of affordable rental units and tying those amounts into our new projects and what that looks like in Chilliwack-Hope, providing supports for vulnerable populations who are being left behind and forced out with dem evictions. I don't see my timer here, so feel free to cut me off when I'm done.
You have 56 seconds left. So.
Thank you. And then addressing the underlying reasons that the unhoused don't have access to affordable housing and why they're in those situations. We absolutely need to address that from a harm reduction approach that is long-term, addressing those needs for everyone. And healthcare needs to be paid for through your health card, not your credit card. Those are the main pieces of affordability that I want to touch on.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment on?
Yeah, I wish to comment.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, the People's Party has a lot of the same, aspirations for improving all the systems that you just mentioned. But what we see is that you're getting the problem backwards. Too much money is at the federal level. It needs to be in the hands of communities so that the communities can manage these programs and address these solutions. For some reason, the NDP, and together with the Liberals and sometimes the Conservatives, they always seem to think that the answer has to be another big federal government program that imposes upon communities and provinces and basically runs roughshod over the Constitution, which had a division of powers. The People's Party believes that we need to shrink the federal government and get more support down to communities so they have direct control of their funding. If you're trying to deal with a problem in Chilliwack or Hope, you shouldn't have to convince politicians in Ottawa and Ontario and Quebec and Atlantic Canada that you have a problem. You should be able to talk to your local government officials.
Thank you so much. Anyone else wish to comment?
I do, Clint.
Okay, that's Kelly.
Okay. I just think it's a perfect opportunity when DJ was speaking about housing to speak about the National Housing Strategy and what the Liberal Party of Canada brought to our own community here with 3 housing projects. We had the affordable housing project on Webb Avenue. We had the housing project, which was a joint venture between the federal government, the provincial government, and our local government for Ruth and Naomi's, which includes childcare and treatment beds, as well as we had affordable housing on Corbould Avenue. So we've done some great things. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But we have a plan to keep moving forward. And Rob, here's something that I actually agree with you on for a change, is what you just said there. it is time that the federal government works with the provincial government. Healthcare isn't a federal issue. It's a provincial issue where a federal government can work hand in hand to make sure that the provincial government and the local government is making sure the needs of the people in their communities are being met.
Thank you so much. Art, you wanted to comment as well?
Yes, our program for affordable housing relates to tiny homes. We believe we can put everybody in their own home. Even those that are on social assistance right now, those who have addiction issues, as long as they're getting a rent subsidy from their provincial governments now, there's no reason that we can't give them a home. We can outfit a perfectly fine tiny home for like $25,000. And if we allowed them to purchase those homes over a 25-year amortization with a mortgage, just like we purchase any other home, that would give them a huge opportunity to own their own home. Life changes once you become a property owner. Your whole outlook changes. And $360 a month is more than enough to pay for the infrastructure and the actual house quality as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The only one who could possibly comment now is Mark, because he's the only one with a chit left. He looks like he's going to wait. Next question is for Rob Bogunovic. Rob, long-term care. It's questions about long-term care. 81% of Canada's COVID-19 deaths have come in long-term care homes, and the government has announced that living conditions of seniors in long-term care is in a state of crisis. What is your plan to improve living conditions in long-term care?
Yeah, it's not an easy issue because it's been mismanaged by some of our biggest provinces for quite some time. Ontario and Quebec, they had to call in the military. They had to do a major study to look at what happened. And the results of that study were kind of shocking. We had individuals who were dying because of, dehydration, from lack of care, negligence, being fed morphine. It was really a shocking, report. But it wasn't something that should have been that surprising. It was a major election issue in Ontario again and again, yet they never got around to fixing it. I think the problem with Ontario and Quebec on that one is that they haven't been particularly good at financially managing their affairs. They're two of the most indebted provinces. Ontario's got a huge debt, and servicing that debt drains their economy. And now we're talking about doing that at the national level. We're going to have real problems moving forward because of how we're choosing to spend money today. And I do not see long care conditions in our old folks' homes or our care centers improving if we are facing bankruptcy and governments are being made to make the tough choices as they basically see their revenues crash. We are in a fiscal crisis. And for some reason, too many of the other parties are ignoring that fact. And the long-term damage of their continuing to ignore that will be felt for generations and by all generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment? We'll move on then. Next question is for Mark Strahl. Mark, what do you intend to do as an MP about the continued boil water advisories that exist on many First Nations reserves today?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And of course, it was a prominent Liberal promise in 2015 that those boil water advisories would all be lifted by 2021. And of course, we've now seen that that's pushed off to 2026. So we clearly need to, first of all, not make promises to First Nations that we have no intention or no ability to keep. We need to, for too long, promises have been made to Indigenous communities and then they have not been kept. And I think that is unacceptable, and we need to be honest and forthright, and we need to work with those communities to develop strategies not only to get the infrastructure built, but to increase the capacity in those communities to service those facilities. These are often in rural, remote, sometimes fly-in communities, and we need to be training individuals in those communities so that they can maintain and operate that. That's a key part of any water and wastewater system is building capacity around it. So it's really unfortunate. I think there was a lot of high hopes in Indigenous communities when the promises were made in 2015, but they've been repeatedly broken. And I think The more times you break trust in that way, like Justin Trudeau has on Indigenous issues, the harder it is to come back from that. The harder it is to work together. And too many times we've seen good intentions. I have no doubt that the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau had good intentions, but no follow through, no ability to follow through. And again, 5 more years for Indigenous communities to live without something that every other Canadian takes for granted, and that's unacceptable. So we'll continue to work to improve that situation right across the country.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming you don't want to critique your own answer, so we'll move on to the next question. That's for Art Green. I'm going to combine 2 here because I think they're talking about the same issue. It's to deal with the issue of affordability in housing. How does your party plan to cut down on the large amount of speculation in the housing market? What other initiatives will you commit to address the housing crisis and thereby reducing the cost of living that folks are facing?
Well, we definitely need to put downward pressure on the market. I mean, I couldn't afford to even rent my own house, never mind buy it. I mean, it has created a lot of wealth for a lot of us older people, but there is absolutely no chance for first-time buyers or those who are income challenged to get into the market. And that's why tiny homes is the answer. We could literally take all the people that are on social assistance and give them a home that they own, that they can pay for with their housing allowance from their social assistance. And they would, and once I don't know about the rest of you guys, but once I owned my first house, it was like it was a different planet. I became a different person. I mean, I have actually been homeless myself, so I know the pressures and the download that goes on to people that face these situations. But for $25,000 approximately, it would cost you about $110 a month on a mortgage. So there'd be lots of room in the $360 BC housing allowance to pay for the infrastructure, to pay for the interest rates. I even was having conversations with Mark's colleague, Brad Biss, who's actually the housing critic for the Conservative Party. And he agrees with this idea as well. Maybe we could set up land trusts so that until people had a certain amount of equity into their home, that we could kind of watch the situation from there. But this is a real opportunity, and we wouldn't have to add a penny to the market, and we could house every unhoused person in the whole country, and it wouldn't cost us any more than we're actually spending right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, any comments? You saving your card? Next question is for Kelly Velonis. And it's a very interesting question. I'm going to embellish it just a bit. Elections like this one, and elections, whether they're municipal, which I have some knowledge of, or whether they're provincial or federal, and a time like we're in right now, facing a pandemic with significantly different views on the best way forward, tend to split communities apart, tend to drive wedges between segments of the community. How, if you were the elected MP, how would you attempt to reunite our city with people that have very opposite views?
Great question. Thank you to who put that question forward, and to Clint. You're absolutely right. We are more divided now than we ever have been. And this is a great question for me, because this is where my skill set and my passion really come into play. This is what I do in the role that I have right now in the community. I bring people together. I bring people together from opposite points, whether you're left, right, middle, wherever you're coming from, and come to find some common ground. Nobody is ever going to agree on everything. But if we come to the table respectfully, with a passion for what we believe in, for wanting better for our community, for our citizens, for our country, I believe that the work can be done to come up with solutions that will work for everybody. When I was out knocking doors, I had a woman say to me, "Oh no, it's not, I'm not voting for you, so you don't need to hear what I have to say." And I said, "I absolutely need to hear what you have to say. Whether you vote for me or not, I will represent every person in Chilliwack and Hope. And I want to know what your concerns are. What keeps you up at night? What are the questions that you have for your local representative? What is it that you need? Because as your representative, as your MP, I represent all people. So this is a question that excites me because I really want to have the opportunity to bring people together and to make Chilliwack and Hope the most inclusive, fast-moving, forward community that we can have.
Any comments? Mark?
Yeah, I simply would say that it would have been good if Kelly had some influence over how Justin Trudeau has conducted himself during this campaign, because he has absolutely created an us versus them approach, an approach very similar to what we've seen in the United States, quite frankly, where one group is pitted against another, one group is demonized, and there is no effort to bring people together. In fact, it's wedge after wedge after wedge with Justin Trudeau. He tries to divide Canadians so that they'll vote for him or get scared and run away from the NDP and run back to the Liberals. He's a master at division and discrimination, and he's run the entire campaign based on that philosophy. And really, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how we put the pieces back together again after such a divisive campaign from Justin Trudeau.
Thank you. Next question is for DJ. How does your party plan to cut down on the large amount of speculation in the housing market? What other initiatives will you commit to address the housing crisis?
This is a great question to expand upon as well. Some of the additional pieces on housing I talked about. Also, we have a lot of homeowners in Chilliwack-Hope riding, and we need to address the housing crisis in a way that isn't going to abandon that equity and impact people negatively who are counting on that equity for retirement. But in terms of the speculation, we absolutely need to ensure that housing is for the living and not for profit or speculation. So the NDP is proposing a 20% foreign buyers tax to ensure that local people, families who intend to live in that home can compete with the extremely intense housing market that we're dealing with right now. These are options that absolutely need to be in place. We also need to address the money laundering issue and how housing plays a role in that in terms of cash going into housing for people who aren't intending to live in it and make a profit and use it to launder their money. Absolutely needs to be cracked down upon, and Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have a plan to do that, and I fully support that. There's again all these pieces around affordable units being available for everyone and addressing the issues that exist for someone to be unhoused and ensure that everyone has a safe, affordable place to live. So thank you for the follow-up question on this issue.
Thank you. Last question is to Rob Bogunovic. Rob, it's a familiar question. I just asked it of Kelly Velonis, given the history of elections driving wedges, as was articulated between folks. How would you attempt, if you're the MP, to reunite our city with people with who hold very opposite views?
Yeah. And I respected an awful lot of Kelly's answer to that one. I agree. When an individual disagrees with me, I want to hear more. I want to hear their arguments. In my classes, especially social justice, I think I wrestled with every single major issue that can be wrestled with that's divided Canadians. And I've done that with students and teenagers. You know, they're very smart, but they often are very strong-willed. And I've had to navigate through some very tough conversations. And it's not easy because some people, they're not interested in tolerance. They're not actually interested in hearing an alternative viewpoint, or they think that if you're presenting a counterpoint, that you must therefore not agree with their position, which frequently isn't even the case. I think we need to be able to have an open dialogue. But one of the things that's been happening in our society is that on numerous issues, people are being shut down from their capacity to speak. They're being silenced on social media. They're being doxxed. They're being shadow banned. They're basically having their platforms torn down because they said something that was considered, unapproved. We've seen that with so much of the data and the information that's been out there, where people are trying to wrestle with COVIDs and vaccine and what's the right policy. We've seen that when we talk about issues connected to elections and whether or not we can trust in the fairness of the process. We've seen that on issues like climate change. I want the open dialogue, and I want the voices to be able to come to the table, be heard, to be recognized. I often can see where the other side is coming from, and I often can, even when I disagree, have very cordial conversations. Example, I've always very much enjoyed my conversations with Arthur Green, but on the fundamental issue of climate change, I think we are quite different in our viewpoints. That doesn't stop us from getting along just fine.
Thank you so much. And that's going to wrap up our public question period. I want to thank you all for staying with the timeline and answering as fully as you could those questions. And thanks to the audience for sending them in. They were some very thought-provoking questions, and I think they were obviously things, as I saw them being repeated, themes that a lot of people were thinking about in this election. I hope that this section of question and answers has been helpful for the folks that are watching and to helping you make a decision. That's, after all, why we're here. We're now going to give each of the candidates 2 minutes to wrap up. To kind of summarize what's been a great evening, I think, the first up is DJ Pohl, representing the New Democratic Party. You have 2 minutes, DJ.
Thank you. We did it. We made it. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. What I'm hearing from the questions is that we need urgent and real action on climate change, affordability, long-term care, the housing crisis, support for seniors, reconciliation, and healthcare. And it will take a political will and a leadership to do that. The other theme that's come up in this conversation is the general tension in our community right now that is palpable, and the divide. And again, the political will and leadership that will lead us out of that and prove to people that your vote and your voice counts. We have a lot of work to do there. People are feeling frustrated. They're feeling fatigued, and we have so much work to do. I am so inspired by the people doing fantastic work in this community who work very hard in the best interest of what we're trying to do to support each other and move forward. That's why I've put my name forward to run. I really want to thank my family for standing behind me for this opportunity. I want to thank the other candidates who put their names forward to run, and democracy plays out in interesting ways, but ultimately we are all working in the best interest for our communities, and we can move forward together, and we can address that tension and that division. Thank you to the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce for creating this space, and Clint for your fantastic moderation skills there. Really appreciate it. And to the voters who are engaging in the democratic process. You have a very difficult decision to make, and I'm excited to see what kind of direction you're looking or hoping for Chilliwack-Hope. And on September 20th, I do hope that you consider voting DJ Pohl for Chilliwack-Hope.
Thank you very much, DJ. Arthur Green represents the Green Party of Canada. Art, it's your turn.
The climate crisis and the exponential threat it imposes is beyond anything or any other crisis or historical event facing all civilization. Since the Industrial Revolution, civilization has been emitting man-made carbon dioxide from fossil fuels into the atmosphere faster than the world's natural processes can absorb it. This rate of emissions began to accelerate during the second half of the last century. According to meteorological studies and 90,000 climate scientists from around the world, our greenhouse gas accumulations are beginning to warm our planet at an alarming rate. Scientists can now calculate rising global temperatures that are directly related to greenhouse gas emissions, and how much more our atmosphere can absorb to keep our average global temperature from rising past 1.5 degrees Celsius. If our average global temperature rises past 1.5 degrees, a series of tipping points will begin to heat the Earth in an exponentially serious manner. Already, the planet's average global temperature has risen 1.2 degrees, so it's imperative that we move quickly. We emit greenhouse gases by burning them, or in the case of natural gas or LNG, leaking methane into the atmosphere, which on average is 86 times more polluting than burning fossil fuels. If we allow this to happen, we risk, in a meteorological sense, extremely dangerous and erratic weather phenomenon and the actual possibility of runaway global warming, where the average global temperature could rise to +5 degrees or more. If this were to happen, the chance of mass extinctions of over 1 million species, including our own, will happen, as there's no way we can survive on our own. Crops would be no more, fresh water would disappear, seas will acidify, and the absorption of moisture into the atmosphere will basically cook us. I know this isn't quite as serious as creating jobs, but at least it should be communicated into our union contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Rob Bogunovic, your turn.
Yeah, I'm a teacher, and I think I want to give people a little bit of a homework assignment right now. It has to do with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came to us by a process that we saw the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives all played a role. Tommy Douglas brought in the first Bill of Rights. The first Bill of Rights at a federal level was brought in by John Diefenbaker, that's NDP Conservative. And then it was a Liberal, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who brought in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and put it in the Constitution. And we had 90% support for the Charter on Rights and Freedoms in all provinces through all generations ever since its creation. It's been one of the rare things that has united Canadians. So my homework assignment, first and foremost, is for people to go and actually read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, actually dig into it, and then ask yourself if they actually believe that all these other parties are defending the rights and the freedoms in that charter. Maybe they are, maybe you'll come to the agreement that they are, or maybe you'll see something in there that you recognize is a bit of a problem. Because from my perspective, we've seen for the last 18 months, the government's using emergency powers to essentially violate our rights, apparently at a whim, moving faster than the courts can go to stop them. And that's been a failure of our charter. They found the chink in the armor, and right now our charter is not protecting Canadians. I think what we need to do is come up with a new strategy. Just as police officers require a warrant to kick in the door and search a place, and they have to get a judge to sign off of that based on the evidence of whether it's justified, I think we need to add something that allows the Supreme Court to rush to action if governments are using emergency powers that violate our rights. I think we need to rethink now whether or not the charter is actually still active in this country.
Thank you so much. Kelly Velonis.
Thank you, Clint. A huge thank you to the Chamber for organizing this, to my fellow candidates for stepping up and showing their passion and determination to make Chilliwack-Hope a better place, and for all the people for their questions and for everyone that joined in tonight. I've lived most of my life in Chilliwack, 45 years to be exact. I went to school here, I raised my kids here, and I based my career from here. I'm proud to say that I live in Chilliwack, and I would be proud to represent Chilliwack and Hope as your federal MP. We have been under a conservative stronghold for too many years, and I don't see that that is working for us anymore. There is no place anymore for a conservative stronghold. What we need is a member of Parliament who will advocate for human rights, not somebody who denies science and refuses to vote against conversion therapy, somebody who has the most vulnerable people making decision. Pardon me. This community needs a leader who will speak the truth, someone unapologetic about basic human rights, and someone with the courage to make hard choices. And that someone is me. I'd like to apologize, Mark, when I said you voted against conversion therapy, you actually abstained from the vote. I'll leave you with 3 questions. Will Canadians be better served by changing direction at this point? Will British Columbians be better served with more Liberal MPs? And will Chilliwack-Hope be better represented by somebody who isn't a career politician, but by somebody who's in the trenches, doing the work and understanding what the needs of this community are? I am asking for you to put your trust in me on September 20th and vote Kelly Velonis as your candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Strahl.
I'd like to thank you, Clint, for your moderating, and the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce and Downtown Business Improvement Association for hosting this debate. You're a strong voice for Chilliwack's business community, and you've always taken that role very seriously and have been very effective in advocating for your members with me. I've enjoyed working with you to advance the cause of Chilliwack's small and medium-sized businesses because they truly are the backbone of this community. Our country's not yet out of the greatest crisis we've experienced in decades. People are hurting, and many are afraid of being left behind. The country is racked by uncertainty and anxiety. The economy is shaky at best, and the cost of living is spiraling out of control. We need strong leadership to lead us out of this crisis. We cannot allow our country to slip into an us versus them approach when it comes to reopening our society and rebuilding our economy. I believe that government can be a force for good, or it can be a force for division. And it's truly unfortunate that in order to try to hold on to power, Justin Trudeau has run such a divisive campaign, focusing on our differences instead of what brings us together. That's not the approach we should be taking at this time. Conservatives have a solid plan that will secure the future for all Canadians, from every region of the country and from every walk of life. We'll bring people together and offer them a hand up as we rebuild our economy and get back onto our feet. It's been my honor to serve the community that I was born and raised in as your representative in the House of Commons. I strive to serve you with honor and respect, and I'm once again asking for your support to allow me to continue working on behalf of the people of Chilliwack-Hope as your MP and to be a strong voice for you in Ottawa. On September 20th, I'm asking you to vote to secure the future for all Canadians and vote Conservative. Thanks for watching tonight.
Thank you so much, Mark. And some final words from me. It's just a pleasure and honor to sit. I feel like I'm in a room with you, although I know that I'm not. But to sit in a place and have discussions like this with people that are passionate about what they believe and are not afraid to stand up and say, I think I'm the best person to provide some leadership in this community. That takes a great deal of courage and it takes a great deal of strength. And for that alone, you should all be commended in stepping up when your community is saying we need leadership. And you've each done that. And as somebody who's been in that arena, I know the kind of toll that it takes on your family. I know the kind of toll it takes on you to run through a campaign. So you're to be commended for that. To the people that live in this community, there isn't a more important decision than stepping up on voting day and marking your X on a ballot. Quite frankly, it's the most important thing you can do to preserve in our country a democracy. That's what it's all about. It's that simple. You want to preserve democracy, get out on the 20th and vote for the candidate of your choice. And lastly, to the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Improvement Association, thanks for continuing this wonderful tradition of being involved in the community, bringing people together. Goodness knows we need lots more of that, bringing people together to talk about these important issues. So I hope that tonight's been helpful to each one of you, and thank you for letting me play a small part in bringing this to you. Good night, everyone, and don't forget to vote on September the 20th.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.